I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and welcome to The Sidebar, a weekly show on the community, arts, culture, and more. Today we're talking to Olivia Wilmot, Casey Shannon, and Carrie Hayes about urban planning, smart growth, and the Tommy Pacello Placemaking Fellowship. So stay with us to hear more. Thanks, everybody, for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So the Tommy Pacello, so I'm going to say who Tommy was to me, because before we talk about the fellowship and the very cool projects that y'all are supporting in Tommy's memory, I always say about Tommy, I think Carrie Hayes here introduced us. I'm 99% sure.
I hope so.
And Tommy was the first person, this was however many years ago, 8 years ago or something, or 10 years ago. I have no sense of time. He was the first person that in this growing movement of like, let's be smarter about growth in Memphis. Let's think about not just bike lanes, but like making streets accessible, making sidewalks inviting. Let's think about things down to the corner and street level. Things you had talked about, Carrie. You were in the Ward administration. Things lots of other people talked about. Tommy made it like really accessible. That's what I always say about him. He just was this person who made it incredibly accessible. He was ultimately the head of Memphis Medical District, the first executive director, president, CEO, and so on. And he was a huge influence on, in his funny way, by making it accessible, he was a really huge influence on behind the headlines as we started saying, let's talk about green spaces and street level, block by block changes. Yeah. That was Tommy to me.
Yeah, for a lawyer and city planner, he was a remarkably gifted communicator and could find a way to make some pretty boring stuff pretty relatable and pretty interesting. Right. And I'm kidding, but really did have a knack for helping people understand why these things mattered and how they could make cities safer and more accessible and more fun and more better places to live.
Olivia, he was also your husband.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to ask you questions about it. So, and it's a lot, but this now a couple years after his untimely, horrible death from cancer, this maybe we segue into unless you want to remember him some, but also, I mean, the fellowship is an incredible honor to him and the things he did. And you've been part of that. Casey here, Carrie, Abby Miller, who was at Memphis Medical District. That's where I think I met her.
Yeah, she was at MMDC with him and then also at the Mayor's Innovation Team that Wharton started here. Yes. So I call her his work wife. She's still a dear friend and she helped with a lot of this. And I get to see her in a couple weeks.
Yeah. Did you come from a kind of urban planning, that sort of background? What is your background?
I wanted to be a Spanish teacher more than anything. I don't know why. I'm obviously not one. So I have a degree in Spanish from U of M. And then I went over to the Clinton School in Little Rock, and I have a master's of public service.
Oh, okay.
So we got to nerd out a lot about a lot of nonprofit stuff and things like that. And when I worked at the Community Foundation for Sutton, and our paths kind of crossed, and we had a lot of really nerdy talk over dinner.
Yeah. And it's a funny group of like around a year ago, I think it was maybe in conjunction, maybe it was September of last year. You mentioned Sutton Morrow, who's COO at the Community Foundation of Greater Memphis. Who else was on? John Zena.
And Paul Young.
John Zena, who's now at Office of Planning and Urban Development, Greenprint, HUD stuff, and Paul Young, now mayor-elect. And they were the urban planning mafia. And then so nerdy people like you and nerdy people like Carrie, and then nerdy people, let's bring them in. You love him, Casey Shannon. But you've been not just in this space, and neither anybody in the room, but you've worked with so many nonprofits, Casey. I mean, you're a lawyer, you're a board member of WXR, as am I, but you've also worked with lots of nonprofits in town trying to do good work, sometimes in the public planning, urban planning, smart city space, but not always.
Right. And that's one of the ways that Tommy and I made a great connection. We went to law school together and became fast friends, in the first week there. And after law school, I went the normal, typical law firm route, whereas Tommy went to go work for the city of Memphis, then ran off to Austin to work at Code Studio. Remember, as he left, I told him I would bless this as long as he promised to take what he learned there and come back to Memphis with, more ideas to make our common hometown a better place. And shortly after he came back, he came to me with the idea of the Memphis Medical District Collaborative, and we ran with it from there together.
Yeah. Well, this is the second year you all have done the fellowship.
This is it.
right?
This is the inaugural year.
This is the inaugural
Yeah.
year, but you announced it a year ago.
A year ago, we did the fundraising push.
That's right. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
and on our common radio station, WYXR, was our main fundraiser that we did
That's
just
right.
about a year ago, kind of a celebration of Tommy
Right.
with remembrances from everybody from people you mentioned,
Yeah.
Doug McGowan and Mayor-elect Paul Young,
Yeah.
and several other members both in the Memphis nonprofit community and in the national, tactical urbanism
Yeah.
community.
What does tactical urbanism mean by that?
So it's like you see a space and you want it to be better, but you don't want to be bothered by going through the government and the stuff. So you just slap some paint lines down and you say,
Yeah.
this is now a bike lane.
I remember Tommy said I think he was on Behind the Headlines talking about this stuff before medical district. And he said something like, well, it's like the people who went out in Broad Avenue in the middle of the night and, painted the lines. And then he goes, we're on TV, like, or something. There was some sort of moment where he was like, oh, I don't think I was supposed to say that. And he kind of he was trying to give me the motion to move on. I was like, no, tell me more about that paint in the middle of the night, Tommy.
Well, I could be wrong, but I do believe Mike Lydon, who's also on our committee, like, I don't know if he coined the term, but maybe he and his partner, Tony, but they have a book.
They wrote
Yeah.
the literal book.
Literal book, Tactical Urbanism.
It's showing your own city what's possible.
Yeah. Right.
In the cheapest and fastest way that you can.
Yeah. I keep trying to get, and then I keep distracting us. But let's talk about, so the fellowship, what is the idea behind the fellowship? And you've had folks who have been participating now, and you've chosen some people that you're going to fund and support. And I don't know who wants to take it all.
Well, really briefly, I think the idea, Tommy and I talked many times over the years about, he was really fascinated by the idea of exchange and the idea of people living in different cities, learning things and talking to each other about them. And really, he was very intentional about creating opportunities and gatherings for people who cared about this stuff to come together and just share with each other. So we thought, a couple of years ago, it would be nice to honor his memory with something that sort of kept doing that. So the fellowship is a sort of fancy, grandiose way of trying to get people, certainly in Memphis, but really all over the country, to think about what could they do in their own communities as quickly as possible with a little bit of money and a lot of encouragement to do this thing called placemaking, which is just another fancy way of saying how do you improve your block or your neighborhood or your district or your city in whatever way that you can. So we announced that last year, as Casey said, on YXR, received a ton of support, and I really don't have time. I'd take up the rest of the podcast if I were to list out all the contributors, but we received well over 100 donations. We raised a little more than $56,000, which is just astonishing, and we did it pretty quickly, I'm happy to say. We opened an application process that we tried to make pretty simple. We got something like 40-some applications from people all over the country, which was really fun, and had a lot of support from Strong Towns, which is another organization that Tommy is very close with. Certainly the Congress of New Urbanism was really a great promotional supporter. IOBI is another organization, stands for In Our Own Backyard, who is our fiscal sponsor for this, so they need a big shout out and a lot of thanks for their support. We got down through a series of rounds of scoring to 5 winners, which I'll break some news and announce those now if that's
we
okay.
We love to break news.
Okay.
And we'll do a story on Daily Memphian that you'll send me something that will include a little bit more about this.
I won't
so don't have to take notes at home.
I won't go into a ton of length because each of these projects is really pretty unique and pretty cool. But from all over the country, Uptown Reinvestment Corporation of Flint, Michigan is going to do a podcast about the history of housing in Flint, which is a really fascinating community. And they have a really interesting idea about trying to tell the story of their city through a conversation about housing. Spring in Our Steps is a nonprofit from Cincinnati, Ohio, that's going to work in the Over the Rhine district. If anybody's been to Cincinnati, really cool district in Cincy, where they're going to do a really neat wayfinding project with some really cool signage and some public art. Bike Walk Provo, Utah, has a really cool idea of doing kind of a rolling speaker series, lecture series about Provo, where they're going to take people on bikes and roll around and talk about their city. CNU Miami, very cool parklet project that they're going to do, a little piece of public space. Parklet,
lingo
let's
watch.
Flag that
That's a
for
new piece of
revisiting.
lingo that I want to explore.
And last but not least, here in Memphis, Tennessee, Calvary Episcopal Church has a really, really great idea about taking a surface parking lot and transforming it into a park in Tommy's memory, which is really neat. So
is that which one is that? So that's one people can maybe relate to downtown. Calvary, which is right catty corner from 100 North Main.
That's right.
Speaking
Close to
of
all
urban
that.
redevelopment.
Yeah, backs up to Grizzlies Prep in that little node of downtown.
Yeah.
They've got a surface parking lot, which they're very excited about making into this space for people to gather and have fun and congregate in a way that's a much better use of that space than a parking lot. So all over the map, literally all over the country, that just barely scratches the surface of the breadth and depth of the applications we got, which were just so cool and so much fun to read. But yeah, those are the 5 that are going to be our first round of fellows.
And so they'll get money, they'll get support, they'll get what's the plan beyond? It's not just a check.
No, it's not just a check. It's Tommy was so great about gathering people and making connections, and we're gonna just connect these winners with people who are in Tommy's network, people who could, help with ideas or writing copy or whatever they need, just like providing some expert hours from his Rolodex.
It's all of our individual and collective knowledge in different realms. With Carrie, with kind of marketing and public relations stuff. Me with the legal side of things. Should anybody need help on permitting or figuring out exactly what they are allowed under law to do, even if we're not asking for anything. I could give them guardrails. And each and every person involved in the kind of Tommy Pacello Placemaking Fellowship team has their own realm of expertise. So we are an open Rolodex. So this is very much not just here's money, go do something great, which, money helps people to do great things.
Yeah.
But
makes it greater.
but one of the most important things that Tommy focused on was finding ways to connect people who were of like mind, where their respective talents could complement one another.
Yeah.
And so that's what we're here to do, is to help these people see their projects to fruition.
I have a bunch more questions, and we'll talk more about all this and the folks who are getting funded and kind of next steps. Let me take a minute here, though, and do a little bit of housekeeping midway through. Remind everyone, this is The Sidebar. I'm Eric Barnes. The Sidebar airs on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30, focused on the community, arts, culture, everything in between. It's not just a radio show. It's one of many weekly podcasts we do at the Daily Memphian, including Bill Dries and Sam Hardiman's Politics podcast, On the Record, the Memphis Grizzlies podcast, hosted by Chris Harrington and Drew Hill, the Memphis Tigers podcast that we brought back, hosted by radio personality Greg Gaston, interviewing, talking to lots of our various Tigers and sports writers. We also have a food podcast. We have a food podcast. I'm a media professional. I'm a podcasting professional. If you need those people in Detroit, Flint, they need some help with a podcast.
They need help with pronunciation.
It's a food podcast.
I'm going to send them right
Gary.
to you.
So just send them right my way. The food podcast, which is known as Sound Bites and hosted by Chris Harrington and Holly Whitfield. That also airs here on WYXR every Thursday at 11, right before The Sidebar. All of our podcasts are on the Daily Memphian site, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And these two podcasts, as well as all of the talk shows on WYXR, are available at WYXR.org or on the WYXR app. You can get archives of all the talk shows, as well as archives of the music shows, and keep up with what all the various DJs are doing. There's just, in the last couple of months, a whole group of new DJs. I'm looking at fellow board member Casey Shannon about that. So again, and I should also say WYXR, it's nonprofit listener-supported radio. Become a member, donate if you can. Go to WYXR.org and find out how all the member benefits, or do a one-off donation. We do really appreciate your support. We also hope that you'll subscribe to the Daily Memphian, which is also a nonprofit 501c3, very much in need of, or dependent on, I should say, your subscriptions and donations. We recently had, coming up soon, I should say, Keith Cole, who is for 13 years was the executive director of Wolf River Conservancy, during which time they raised a mere $62 million and took on, I don't know how many thousands of acres that they protected and begun or in the middle of construction of the Wolf River Trail and all kinds of great things. We talked about that. Sam Prager from Memphis Current. He's coming on very soon in advance of their holiday party. We recently had Kevin Sharp from the Dixon on talking about the very, very cool stuff going on at the Dixon right now. Also, Behind the Headlines I didn't mention, but we do that as a show over on WKNO with the good folks there. It's also a podcast that you can get wherever you get your podcasts. We recently did a show on downtown safety with Bill Gibbons, Lawrence Green, and former police director Mike Rawlings. And coming up soon, Doug McGowan, 11 months into his time, and we mentioned him earlier, actually. You all know him, and Tommy knew him well. Doug McGowan, who's 11 months into being CEO of MLGW, a job that he's so happy he took. He's just, how happy he is that he took. No. And then Kevin Ritz, U.S. attorney, we'll have him on coming up in the next few weeks. Also, for the last month or two, I've been promoting our commercial real estate seminar, which was headlined by Paul Young. He's kind of everywhere, it seems like. As well as Ursula Madden, who's now the community point person for the Big Ford Blue Oval plant. Gwen Fisher, who does economic development for the chamber, and a number of folks from deep inside the commercial real estate business. That was all a week or two ago, but you can get that online. If you missed it, you can go to YouTube and just search for Daily Memphian, or go to the Daily Memphian site, search for the commercial real estate seminar. One thing, it is interesting when I think about like the shows, like having had or about to have Keith, we taped it, so my time space continuum is a little altered, but Keith Cole from Wolf River, and I was talking to him about how around the time he got to Wolf River and they began to really try to expand what they were doing. They were kind of a protector of lands. They had some paddling programs. They'd done some amazing work to recover the water in the Wolf River, but they didn't have huge plans for a $60 million connection and taking on of all this land. And, Greenprint happened. John Zena, who we mentioned, he'd been doing Greenprint. Tommy's doing his stuff. There's all these people kind of in that 06, 7, 8. When were you in the Wharton administration?
So we were in office. I was there from late 2009 to 2012.
That whole period, and all this people, and it comes back to what you were saying about the placemaking fellowship is if you, and I was going to say, if you talk to any one of those people who had a dream of doing something like tactical urbanism or a green line or, bike lanes or whatever, they all sounded crazy individually.
They were.
They were, because it was like that was not the vibe in Memphis at the time. There were some one-off successes and I'm not taking away from those. But when you sort of see that there's this whole thing happening and you helped us set up whole shows. I think the first time I met Tommy on TV, at least, was with other people doing this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And that became, I've said this story way too many times, but I'll say it forever. When Todd Richardson, who was, I don't know what you call him, one of the key founders of Crosstown, who had that vision and a lot of people supporting him and others. But Todd was at the center of saying, hey, we can reimagine Crosstown as a place, like placemaking, all that. I met Todd at a cocktail party, introduced by a mutual friend. He said, you ever seen that building over at Crosstown, the empty one? Yeah, we're gonna renovate that. And I remember thinking, that's great. I'm going to go get a drink. Because you're nuts.
You're
by the way, you're a professor at U of M. And yeah, you're definitely nuts. And then he kind of, he talked to people like Tommy and all these people together in that time frame. It became possible to rethink places in a way that had not been possible for a long time in Memphis.
Well, another example from that same era, I mean, we're sitting here recording this next door to the Tennessee Brewery, which people forget 10 years ago was slated for demolition. Mm-hmm. It was going to be demolished.
Yes. And had been the building that Memphians, had always said is just beautiful, but there's just nothing you can do with it.
That's right. There's no way you can.
It was admired, but it was just this kind of relic, a thing apart.
Yeah, and had been empty for decades. I don't know, when the brewery went out of business. But anyway, was a massive eyesore. Was a legitimate piece of blight. Had a non-local owner and was very seriously going to be demolished. Yeah. And the conversation that Tommy was a part of, I was certainly there. Doug Carpenter, Andy Cates, Taylor Berger, some other people deserve a lot of credit for doing a little bit what we're talking about, which is kind of animating it. We did a beer garden party. Some of your listeners, I hope, will have fond memories of that. But what it did was it kind of it didn't pretend to be the entire solution. It pretended to do a little thing that kind of showed people, oh, well, maybe this does have some viability. Maybe the parking isn't the thing that's going to keep it from happening. Maybe this. And you started to show people, okay, well, maybe something is possible here. And now, of course, you had real investors step in and legitimate people like Billy Orgel and others, do a real
now
redevelopment.
Doing 100 North Main.
Exactly.
He's the lead developer on that, which thing has been lost for quite some time.
And so what excites me about the fellowship and the folks we've got included in it are none of them are suggesting that this project will be the thing that fixes their city. What it is going to hopefully be a little catalyst, a little little encouragement that will let them bring some other people along with them. And I hope over the next several years, we'll see whatever they do will continue to grow and hopefully lead to some really cool big outcomes like the redevelopment of the brewery or Crosstown or any of the things you mentioned.
There had to be times for each of you, and I won't just put this on Olivia, but to the degree you want to talk about it, where Tommy would come and have an idea and you'd go, oh, honey. Or no, that's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, there's little stuff. It's not like, the brewery was developed overnight. It was a party.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so that's easy. But it got people talking and seeing it and not just assuming it had to be demolished. No.
Yeah. You'll do this again with the placemaking? Is it the idea to do it annually or every other year?
Yeah, the other fun thing that we can announce is we still actually have some funding left, and we will next year when we're ready reopen the application process and certainly look to the Daily Memphian and others to help us publicize that. But there's will be.
If anyone else asked me, Carrie, we'd probably say it. If Olivia or Casey call me,
I'll have Olivia ask.
Yeah.
But yeah, we will probably try to do some more fundraising. We'll reopen the applications. We'll get a lot of the folks that applied, or I should say some of the folks that applied this year did contact us late in the process and say, oh, we're actually not quite ready. Some really, really good, interesting projects just weren't quite ready this year. So I think we have every intention of continuing it, for a few more years and we'll see. But excited to see what happens with these first 5 in this next 12 months or so.
I want to stay with you for a second, which is we're talking about you being marketing and communications, but for how many years were you chief of staff for the city of Chattanooga?
I was the chief of staff for about 14 months.
During COVID?
During, most of that year.
You'd been head of communications, and then you moved into that position.
I had a deputy chief of staff role, and then I became the chief of staff in February 2020, and it was smooth sailing from there on out. Our last year in office, I was the chief of staff to Andy Burke at the city of Chattanooga, and the election fell in such a way so that we were out of office, term limited out, in April of 2021. So it was almost just that first year of COVID entirely.
How much, maybe I've asked you this before, I'm sure I've asked outside of here, but I don't know if I've asked you as an interview, how much, for years you'd been in and around and working on these issues, largely from kind of a strategic communications. You weren't a lawyer. You weren't an urban planner. You weren't necessarily doing the spreadsheets to fund the things that were going on. Your main thing was talking about them, promoting them, getting the word out about it. And then suddenly you were doing in a serious way.
Well, I all the
with
credit,
lots of staff and all that.
Yeah,
blah, blah, blah.
The city of Chattanooga has had a phenomenal Department of Transportation that was doing a lot of the stuff, had a very healthy planning culture. They were doing a lot of really interesting placemaking stuff long before I got on the scene. But yeah, it does. It certainly changes your perspective on the stuff when you're inside City Hall, hearing ideas from people who want to do this kind of stuff. It's a different vibe for sure. Yeah.
I mentioned having Paul Young, mayor-elect now, head of DMC, and John Zena, and some more on the show on Behind the Headlines a year ago, probably to mark Tommy to remember their friend and classmate and all that. And it was wonderful. I'm curious for y'all. Y'all are, if not close friends with Paul, very close friends with Paul. You all know Paul real well. And what do you want to see as you come at it from this place? I'll start with you, Olivia. What do you want to see from Paul? From the point of view of he is a person who's an urban planning background. Everyone's got their thing right now. They want the stadium deal done. They want crime stopped. They want all kinds of things. But just within the purview of the kinds of things we've been talking about, what would you love to see Paul do?
Oh, well, I'm excited about having like a Gen X mayor. I'm super stoked about having somebody that's younger, has maybe more
youthful je ne sais quoi to
innovative. That's it. Yeah. And
does he speak French? Do you know?
I don't know. But just more support for stuff like this, like more support and funding for our communities and our neighborhoods, because everybody talks about crime, but they don't talk about the poverty that got us here.
Yeah.
And I was a supporter of his because I feel like he gets the full circle of the poverty and crime loop. And that's what I'm.
Yeah. Carrie?
Yeah, I think every mayor in every city is in some way a response to the previous mayor. And so I was looking at something the city of Memphis had posted on social media about some of Mayor Strickland's accomplishments from a development standpoint, which really are impressive. I mean, he got a lot delivered from a bricks and mortar standpoint in his 8 years at mayor. I think that does leave, I would hope, some runway for Paul to think about some of the programming, some of the human elements, some of the neighborhood organizing, some of those things that Olivia alluded to about kind of how we fill in these spaces and the neighborhoods in between some of these larger development things that got delivered under the Strickland era. I think Paul's got the right mentality and the right worldview to think about the neighborhoods betwixt and between and how they need to be better served a little bit.
You just said that so much more eloquently than I did.
It's betwixt and between, which I'm very proud of.
I'll
be bragging
really
about
good.
that.
No, it wasn't more eloquent. I mean, it's different. I could go on and on about that stuff. Let me do this with just a few minutes left here. I've asked Carrie before because you've been on the show before, but I always try to ask everybody what their first concert was. What was yours again? I can't remember.
Mine was
was it some Christian rock band? Wasn't it?
I think they may have started as a Christian rock band. It was the Cranberries. Dolores Reardon, may she rest in peace. And Toad the Wet Sprocket opening at Red Rocks Amphitheater.
That's pretty good. Casey?
Huey Lewis and the News.
Wow.
With Robert Cray band opening at the Mid-South Coliseum.
Nice.
Did you win a contest on MTV to get free tickets or something? That is like bread and butter MTV.
Hey, I am a
era.
child of the 80s, man.
Yes. Yeah. And Olivia?
Show my millennialness real quick. It was Boyz II Men, and Brandy opened, and it was everything.
And where was it? Was it here?
The Pyramid, yeah.
The Pyramid. Mm-hmm. Nice. Very nice. Where was that? I'm sorry.
The Coliseum.
It was the Coliseum.
Yeah.
Coliseum.
Eric, what was your most recent concert?
Carrie Hayes. My most recent concert was Cat Power. Actually, it was Cat Power at WXR, which was amazing and really cool.
by Soundfest.
Yeah, erased by Soundfest. We did just a show promoting that. Prior to that was U2 at the Sphere.
Huh.
Following in the footsteps of my friend Carrie Hayes, I went to the Sphere. And
yeah, overstimulating.
It was a little
the opposite of tactical urbanism.
Yeah,
the complete opposite of iterative guerrilla placemaking.
100%.
Las Vegas as a whole is the opposite of tactical
100%.
urbanism. It is actually just kind of a suffering hellhole of like excess.
Why does this exist?
I don't think we got any. I don't
Why?
think we got any fellowship applications from Las Vegas.
No,
I'm almost certain of it.
I very much doubt that. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, especially Olivia.
Thanks.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah, your husband meant a whole lot to a lot of people. So that is all the time we have, though. Again, I'm Eric Barnes. This is The Sidebar. It's on WYXR 91.7 every Thursday at 11:30. If you missed any of the show today, you get the full podcast of the interview with the Daily Memphian, WYXR, where we get your podcast. As I mentioned, we'll have more info in a story on Daily Memphian about the winners of the people who were awarded, the awardees, says the lawyer, of the fellowship. So more about that. You can learn more about the whole thing. We'll link to everything from there. So that is all the time we have this week, though, and we'll see you next week.